know it's crazy, but it's
You're watching Channel Zed, the world's leading zombie apocalypse channel. Broadcasting live from Studio Zed.
Makes me act the way I do.
Welcome to Unreal World.
Yeah, it is so unreal. I mean, what are we living in, Dave?
I know. We're living in a totally bizarre, unreal world, and it's starting to feel like we'll never go back. So,
I mean, you don't even need a reality TV show, right? Because it's like an unreality TV show is what we need for now.
yeah, that's true. I mean, even when I see pre-pandemic things and like people are out and about, I'm like, you guys are being so irresponsible. So,
yeah, I was even like watching a movie that was like set in like the 50s, and I'm like, they're not wearing masks, and I'm like, it really has changed, our perspective just on life in general, and it's sort of like, okay, well, what is normal now?
yeah, I know but I think I keep wanting to go back, right? I keep being like, okay, next month we're going to go back. Next month we're going to go back. And then we end up having to cancel things. We just canceled my kid's school got canceled again. And like this play that I was hoping to help with got canceled again. And it's like everything's getting canceled.
Well, honestly, I think part of that is that like so many of us want to have things go back to normal, but the reality, if we like look at the epidemiology, is like it's not going to happen for a while, right? So it's like we get our hopes up, but then like if you just look at the data and the science, like you could predict that all this stuff is going to get canceled again.
Right.
Just saying.
But we keep hoping, and I think Unreal World, which is sort of the show that we're bringing back to life today, was this like big thing that was going to be a part of ZAMA, right? Part of the conference that we really thought we're going to be able to do this, and it's going to have a live component, right?
Yep. Yeah. Actually, why don't we bring on Ilana Rein, who is the director of Channel Zed, and who really was going to be in-person filming as part of Unreal World. Ilana, welcome to this show, and we'd love to hear from you. What are your thoughts on Unreal World? What was it supposed to be? What was your role in it? And what happened?
Yeah. Hey guys, good morning from Los Angeles, where the apocalyptic fires seem to have decreased, but there's some strange air raid sirens and helicopters above head. So if things cut out, we'll have to explore what fresh apocalypse this might be. But so far, so good. Yeah. So basically, when we realized that ZAM was going to have to be remote, the conference that is normally held in person in October, way back in March, Athena and I saw the writing on the wall. And Athena approached me and said, I want to do this thing called Channel Zed. And as we realized this was going to be a fully remote conference, the idea emerged with the amazing help and contribution of one of our producers, Pamela Winfrey, to have a live component, have something that would involve us gathering. And there were so many unknowns at the time. We didn't realize how the disease would progress, but it was something like, let's see if we can recapture some sort of in-person component that might involve meeting up somehow safely, of course. So we got introduced to Carl Flink of Black Label Movement Dance Company in Minnesota. And what they were going to do was take a road trip across the country that would culminate in Arizona. And then it would involve some performance, which I would film and partially direct this whole, amazing experience. And I think we should bring Carl on to discuss the details of how this would manifest. And obviously it didn't manifest, but there's a lot more to talk about.
Yeah, Carl, welcome. It's so amazing to have you here with us. And I just have to say, like, Carl, I had the pleasure of actually meeting you in person before all of this happened. And we even got to dance together as part of the body storming that you did at ASU. So I was so excited about the fact that, we were putting together this concept that would allow us to have some in-person piece of ZAM, and your dance company and your creativity was such a huge part of that plan. So thanks for being here with us to talk about Unreal World. And I'm going to just put up our image from Unreal World, and maybe you can talk a little bit about it while we have this image up.
Yes, well, thank you all. It's really great to be back and try to resurrect our dream coming in the not so distant future. But let's look back a little bit at what actually happened. We had come up with this idea of my dance company piling into a recreational vehicle, an RV, and driving across the United States and appearing in various natural and urban and rural locations in yellow and or white hazmat suits, and doing some performative elements here and there, maybe walking down a deserted main street of Cody, and or places like that, and then arriving down in Arizona to do this fantastic film idea of my piece called Canary with Ilana, with the hopes of injecting an element of in-person performance to the remote ZAM that was happening this year. And we had set up a COVID protocol to make sure that we could responsibly and safely put 7 people into that RV and drive for 8 days across the country. And we were working with a medical doctor here at the University of Minnesota, Dr. John Hallberg, and we were in our protocol. We were doing our isolation, and we had done one test, and we were doing our second test, and one of our movers actually, their test came back positive. And that actually caused us to have to put the whole brakes on everything, because there wasn't a chance for us to isolate further for 5 days, 5 to 7 days, retest and get going in time to get down to ZAM. And so in the end, we had to pull the plug on that incredible journey. But as Ilana and I and all of us have talked about, is we're actually trying not to see it as a failure, but actually as a success, because we had a protocol in place to be responsible with people's lives and health, and it worked. It made sure that 7 people didn't turn a recreational vehicle into a COVID incubator and drive down to a conference to spread the disease. And the fact that I'm currently living in one of the epicenters of the second wave of the pandemic in the United States, in the Twin Cities, these things, it's easy to find humor in it, but it's also deadly serious stuff. And so we really came away, even though there was the sadness of not connecting in this creative enterprise, we came away saying we kept people safe. We learned more about how we should do these protocols moving forward, because we actually realized that we needed to tweak it a little bit for the future in terms of spacing tests, maybe making sure rehearsals hadn't happened after one of the tests, things like that, that allowed us to start thinking about how we can do this better in maybe possibly the spring or later, since clearly the pandemic's not going away anytime soon.
Carl, I want to bring on one of our comments here from Pam. She says, can you imagine the impact of seeing people in full PPE walking down the street? So can you talk a little bit about, what you were imagining for, this process of, getting out of the RV in these hazmat suits, and what you were going to do and where?
Yeah, we were going to embrace the idea of kind of near future science fiction of, with the pandemic and everything else that's been going on, with the intensity of the election, the incredible forest fires and their environmental impact in California and beyond, the past few months have clearly felt almost apocalyptic. And what we wanted to do with the hazmat suits is create images that are just like 10 years, 5 years down the road, where people who saw them virtually, or people who were live when we were there, would be kind of forced or asked to to look at the idea of where are we. So I think a lot of what the unreal world is about is asking the question of, if we just cast ourselves 10 years forward and look back, what are we doing? Why are we responding this way, to our elections, to environmental change, to the pandemic, and why were we so challenged in the actual moment that we're currently living in to respond in collective action?
So can I just ask for just a little background that I think those of us know, but
Yeah.
some people at home, can you tell us a little bit about this sort of idea of embodied research? And
Absolutely. So, I'm a professor at the University of Minnesota, and I'm the artistic director of a professional company called Black Label Movement. I was a longtime professional in New York City with the Jose Limon Dance Company as well. And one of the things that I've come to learn over this time in academia is how centered so much research is purely on the mind, and not this notion of what I would call the integrated body, that we have. Our mind is a part of this incredible instrument and system that is the human body. And that, as a dance artist, that's the medium in which I work. And so when I think of research now, I don't simply think of it as something that's an intellectual journey. I think of it as a journey of this integrated body, and that the senses of the entire system are critical for knowing the world. And that when we kind of go into this mind-body split thinking, we're actually losing a critical part of our research. And dance is clearly, given that it's about communicating through the body, is a particularly clear example of what I would call embodied research.
And you had an example of like a thing where you guys had all basically danced out. Were you cells? What was that? Because I think that was
yeah. So for the last actually past decade, we've been working with a biomedical engineer at the University of Minnesota, David Odie, on developing a technique we call body storming, or the body storming system. And what an old grind in the choreographic world is that it's all about space, time, and energy. Well, interestingly, when I started talking with David, who's a biomedical engineer researching cancer, whenever he talked about the interior of a cell that he was looking at, he talked about space, time, and energy. And so it caused us to think, what if we were to bring bodies into spaces, and scientists and choreographers together to talk about what they see, the mechanisms they see happening inside of the cell, and to see if we could create prototypes using bodies and space to imagine and create a model of their scientific research. And we've done this with multiple different scientists now at the Marine Biological Laboratory out in Massachusetts, at the National Center for Biological Sciences in Bangalore, India, and at ASU. We've been doing this work, and it's an incredible way to fast model scientific research. And quite frankly, it's also a lot of fun, as Athena can testify.
Yeah, and maybe can you now can we turn to like how Unreal World itself was sort of embodied research? Because I think that's like a really cool piece of this. It's not just a reality show, but it's actually research in action, and sort of at this interface with a world that is kind of unreal, that we're trying to understand in terms of, not just the actualities of the pandemic, but all of the social implications of it, and how people respond to seeing things that are unusual or that might be scary.
Yeah, I mean, Black Label was definitely, I think, volunteering itself as test subjects. We were going to put 7 people into an RV, and one of the things my family and I actually ended up having to use that RV that we had to cancel, but we still had. And even just having 5 of us in that RV for 5 days, it's surprising how enclosed, especially because when we were going to be driving out to you, it's the early part of the winter in many of the states we're going through. And we found, one, that it was very isolating and enclosing, and that maybe because of the pandemic, we were at a place where we really didn't need to be in a tight, confined space with each other, but wanted broader landscapes to run through. And that, I think, what Black Label Movement was going to find out is, how could 7 of us survive together in an RV road tripping down to Arizona? But we're also going to be wrestling with bringing that imagery into various sites, beautiful natural sites, into small towns, maybe in Wyoming or Colorado, where people might respond with questions or maybe even concerns about, why are we there? And so we were, a lot of the Unreal World was going to be improvisational, because we were going to be trying things out as we went. And so I think there was going to be this very interactive loop with the people that we encountered. And the research was going to come from those conversations and responses, both from the ZAM participants, but also from the people that we encountered along the way. And again, I think I see in one of the comments from Liz, the body is not just an intellectual space, it's an emotional space, it's a spiritual space. And seeing these images that were kind of out of inconsistent or unusual, like at a beautiful mountainscape with people in yellow hazmat suits, they were going to jog people's emotions and thoughts, and we were going to see what came out of that. And I think that kind of living research was going to be, I really mourn the loss of that opportunity.
Yeah. So I think that really is very significant for me, is this idea that as we were talking about this and as it was evolving, everything has been remote since March. So I was living in this anticipation of this physical encounter. I mean, everything I've worked on before, all the films I've made, it's a really intimate experience as your dances and performance. You're involved with people face to face. So I began to project into the future of what this experience was going to be like. And it was a very profound shift I was experiencing in my own creativity, in my own brainstorming, in our conversations, our text threads and our emails together. There was an energy that was profoundly different from all the energy leading up to this. So then when we realized, okay, we actually have to just 86 this for now. The disappointment was physical. It was actually a form of grief, and it was real. And then there was also guilt associated with it, because I was like, wait a minute, there are nearly 250,000 dead Americans, and I'm grieving this art project. How dare I? And that then spurned a whole conversation of, well, you know what? It's okay, because we are grieving culture, the loss of so much culture right now, of performance, of museums being closed. So in that way, I think we, as a group, the whole ZAM team, everyone involved in this project, was able to say, okay, let's find a way forward. Let's continue this discussion. How are we going to create work? How are we going to make art, films, dance, performance during this time and leading into the future? So through the grief, we are emerging, we are rising again, and that's hope. But it was very significant, the embodiment of the grief, of the loss of not being able to meet in person. But also, last bit, very thankful that my teenage son, who was going to be my PA on this shoot, and I didn't come back to LA with COVID. So thank you.
But there was Ilana, that I couldn't agree with you more. I felt this physical consequences of us having to cancel this moment, and I think there was a wildness to the creativity of this particular project. The fact that there were so many unknowns, even as we were meticulously planning this trip. I had this anticipation of standing on a precipice. What are we going to discover? How are people going to respond? We weren't certain what was going to happen. We were actually embracing the unknown of this, and I think that as an artist, that you and I've talked about this flow state.
Right.
There was an opportunity for us to enter the artistic flow state in a way that is so unusual when you're trying, often can't happen as you're trying to build a performance for a theater or you're meticulously editing a film. Our planning days were going to be in the RV with the 7 Black Label movers sitting around a table while I'm driving, talking about what are we doing today and what are we going to discover. And that kind of, again, wild moment doesn't happen that often in artistic ventures.
Right. We were deprived of our flow state.
Yeah.
And we because we know it, we're familiar with it. We know how time just absolutely disappears.
Yeah.
And we wanted it. It's like not just to make this thing, but like, wow, this is what we used to have. We used to be able to do this. So how now the challenge is, how can we get this back? What can we do?
We have a lot of comments here kind of along these lines. So, Erica, just talking about in general, right? Performance arts have been suffering, and Pam is asking, how do you think the arts will have to change? And, is Unreal World like a example for, even though it didn't materialize in the way that we imagined it, it still, it had an existence as this protocol. And then, we decided that it had to not happen at this moment. But, how do you think this can maybe be a little microcosm for thinking about the arts during the time of COVID?
I think there's 2 challenges around, among the many challenges around the pandemic, but I think we can too quickly assume that it's going to change everything and that it should, but also that thinking that we also are furiously trying to get back to where we were. I think that what I'm gaining from the pandemic is a great value of why live performance is critical, that being present to see art isn't simply appreciating the artistic moment, but it's appreciating the community that you're with in a live way together, and that's different than seeing things on electronic platforms. But I do think that one of the things that I'm certainly learning from Unreal World and Channel Zed is how do we translate those live experiences into parallel experiences on the internet and other electronic media. Like, that's an opportunity that so many live artists were just not really thinking about because it just wasn't in their field of vision.
Right. And I think one thing that we learned from ZAM and how successful that was, and the feedback we've gotten from all the participants, is that even when we can go back in person, we need to keep Channel Zed alive and allow it to exist so we can have correspondents from Denmark and New York who can't afford to fly to Arizona to be a part of this. So it is like this integration, like you said, Carl, that's necessary. Like, let's open up the audience. Let's bring it to more people.
Right. I wonder a little bit, one of the things that has inspired me around Unreal World and some other projects that I've been doing is I have heard numerous times, actually, not just once or twice, people say that one of the advantages or one of the gains we'll have from a post-pandemic world is there'll be less physical contact between people. And that statement just terrifies me because of its, the meta consequences of less presence, less physical presence between people is not simply a feel-good moment of being at an audience enjoying a great concert. It's actually, if we're not present with each other, it's so much easier to distance in other people, and the potential that raises for the negative consequences in terms of insensitivities and violence and things of that nature. So I also think Unreal World and live artists who are trying to reconnect during this process is essential for the wellness of our larger communities.
Yeah, let's talk about the future for a minute here. So, Dr. Zed, Joe Alcock, is bringing up that, we have had some good news in terms of vaccines. And of course, there will be a time frame, they have to roll out. And, so we're really looking at probably sometime in the fall or winter of next year. But, there is a future that we can at least start to see now where we will be able to return to, in-person events. So, what does that mean for the future of Unreal World as well? So, if we are going to have Unreal World take place, does that need to take place before things are open again? Or does it have an existence after we return to, something more like what we're accustomed to? What are your thoughts about that, Carl?
Well, I think one of the things I've learned is that the hazmat suit is a iconic image that was iconic before the pandemic, has been supercharged by the pandemic, and will certainly live with us after. I actually think that the idea of Unreal World is easy in some ways to separate from its inspiration from the pandemic, and use it as a lens to look at multiple issues that are facing our communities, both local, regional, and beyond. And so I feel like, yes, maybe it would be even more current while the pandemic challenges are still arising. But I think if it were to happen afterwards, maybe even sequentially, it still has relevance.
Yeah,
Ilana, do you have thoughts? Yeah.
I agree totally. And I think there's no shortage of reasons why we might want to don a hazmat suit. It could be environmental catastrophe. I mean, if someone were walking, and we saw pictures of people out here in California wearing them because of the wildfires. When I was younger, there was very deep concern about nuclear radiation. I mean, I think in terms of science fiction movies and tropes, that's the main association. It's like, oh, it's, radiological, Chernobyl, let's wear that. So it can be adapted. And I think, creatively, it's like, why are we wearing these suits? What is it outside of us that we're protecting inside? And the same flow and rhythm, like, okay, we're still going to meet up. We're still going to have these protocols. And it'll make us also think, like, are we ever going to go back to shaking hands the way we used to, or kissing on the cheek? It's going to bring up a lot of very interesting issues about intimacy, creativity. So it's our job as people contributing to culture to really explore this.
It's like the entire world, when we finally start truly emerging from the pandemic, is going to experience all of this discomfort of your very first date all over again. It's just going to be like, what is happening? Can I hug you? Can I sit next to you? I mean, it's just like, it's going to be a really fascinating time of how do we reconnect in thoughtful ways.
One of the things I love about the hazmat suit is that, simultaneously it's something that you can go into, which then makes it safe for you to like go right up to somebody and get a hug, right? Regardless of whatever else is going on. But it also is this barrier, right, between you and others, between you and the world. And I think that idea, that, sort of symbolism that this hazmat suit has on sort of both sides of that is a really, powerful tool for exploring a lot of these issues that we're trying to deal with, right? I mean, if the world is unreal, and then we need a hazmat suit to mediate that experience, what does that mean for, our embodied way of being in the world. And so I really love all those dimensions to the hazmat suit idea.
People are hungry for intimacy. I mean, I see a comment here about parties here in LA, and you know, people are having parties all over the country. They're hugging, they're dancing. It sucks. It's one reason we are stuck in this pandemic, but we also have to acknowledge the fact that people want that intimacy. And, you know, what are we going to do with it? I was on a hiking trail just yesterday, and I ran into someone that I hadn't seen since February. And they ran up and they wanted to hug me. And I was like, whoa, what do I do with this? I don't know what you're doing. It was a very embodied experience of so many things happening: fear, anger, desire, like what? Yeah. And, you know, like you said, we're going to be living this for months afterwards.
And the hazmat suit actually is the ultimate foil for all of that, because you know, the mask creates distance, there's no doubt, and it's serving important roles. But if you put on a hazmat suit, you're saying, I do not have access to you and you do not have access to me, no matter what our proximity. And I think it creates this wonderful lens for us to kind of supercharge these kind of conversations. And so I mean, maybe that's what we're learning about Unreal World, is that it's less pandemic specific and more asking these questions, you know, of apocalyptic conditions that Zam and Zed are all talking about.
Well, I cannot wait for us to continue with Unreal World. And Carl, you'll be joining us as the host of Unreal World as we figure out what it's going to be in the new year. So
cannot wait.
Before we go, I just want to ask. So you said one of the actors in the troupe tested positive, and I just want to know how are they doing? How's the rest of the troupe doing?
Yeah, thanks for that, Dave. Actually, the company is doing great. We were the mover. We call our company members movers. They were asymptomatic and actually had very, very light experience with their COVID, and so happy to report they're doing great. And we are actually just in this process of trying to figure out, you know, we had a live concert planned for the end of January, which we thought was going to be safe, and of course is not anymore. So we're in the process of kind of rethinking what our whole 2021 is going to look like. But it's exciting, and things like Unreal World and Channel Zed are ways for us to rethink how we stay active as a live dance performance company.
That's good. Because I know, meeting you guys, you know, part of what I was really interested in was sort of seeing, all right, how's this going to play out? How are we going to see you? Like, how are you guys sort of like, you know, you call it the Unreal World, and when those old MTV shows, like when you would see how the people would interact. And so then I've always wondered, like, how are you guys doing? You know, so I'm glad to hear.
Well, and I think that was going to be very real. I mean, I again, with my experience with the RV with my family, they look really, you know, wonderful, and it's like, oh, this is a dream come true. I'm going to travel across the United States in an RV with my, you know, with my band. And I think there would have been a lot more psychological stressors to discuss. And even though the RV was quote unquote said to hold 9 people, it barely held 5. It would have been like sardines for 8 days. So one, we probably would have smelled bad. We may not have emerged from the RV talking very much, or we would have been the happiest, most bonded dance company ever. I mean, I think it was that's why we have to do it, because there's still this psychological experiment that needs to take place.
And it's all going to go in. We're going to make it work.
And it's going to be great reality TV. We're going to get it all on film and provide it for everybody's consumption enjoyment. So
absolutely.
All right. Well, I am so much looking forward to how Unreal World unfolds, both in our unreality and in the concept with the, you know, hazmat suits and RV. So Carl, thanks so much for being a part of Channel Zed and envisioning our first reality TV show, Unreal World.
Thanks for letting us join the community. We're so excited.
Crazy, but it seems so logical. I can't deny that there is something supernatural with you.